I felt very ill. I wanted to die. You know, I was ready to give up. Everything else, everything else was removed from our lives. We had no rights anymore. We had no opportunity to earn a living. I had no schooling, and there was a lot of propaganda.
War is brutal. Lives are lost in an instant. But when atrocities are committed, and your conscience demands that you stand up for the good of others, choosing to help humanity in the face of such darkness, that is when you are remembered in the halls of greatness and celebrated among the truly victorious. Gabrielle Weidner was one such woman. She didn't set out to be a hero. She was a woman who loved the simple things: morning coffee, a good book, the laughter of children. But life doesn't always let us choose our battles. In a time when the world seemed to be losing its soul, Gabrielle found herself standing at a crossroads she never imagined. Gabrielle Weidner was born on August 17, 1914, in Brussels, Belgium, into a family deeply rooted in faith and service. Her father, Henri Weidner, was a Dutch Seventh-day Adventist pastor, while her mother, Marie Weidner, was a devoted homemaker. Gabrielle grew up in a household that emphasized the importance of compassion, helping others, and living a life of integrity. This upbringing would prove pivotal as Europe descended into one of the darkest periods in human history. The Weidner family was part of a close-knit community of Seventh-day Adventists, a Christian denomination known for its emphasis on social justice, education, and health. Gabrielle's early years were spent in various European countries, including Switzerland and France, where her father's pastoral duties took them. This cosmopolitan upbringing exposed Gabrielle to multiple languages and cultures, making her fluent in Dutch, French, and German, a skill set that would later become invaluable in her resistance work. As a young girl, Gabrielle was known for her kindness, intelligence, and strong sense of duty. She was a diligent student and showed a deep interest in the world around her. Her family's frequent relocations due to her father's work fostered in her a resilience and adaptability that would later become crucial during the war years. The Weidners lived modestly, but were rich in faith, love, and a sense of responsibility towards their fellow human beings. The interwar years in Europe were marked by political and social upheaval. The Treaty of Versailles, which ended World War I, left Germany economically crippled and politically humiliated, sowing the seeds of resentment and nationalism. As the Weidner family moved to France, Gabrielle witnessed the rise of Third Reich. The 1930s were a time of growing tension, as the German forces' aggressive policies and militarization made the prospect of another major conflict increasingly inevitable. Gabrielle was in her early 20s when the political situation in Europe began to deteriorate rapidly. Hitler's annexation of Austria in 1938, followed by the occupation of Czechoslovakia, sent shockwaves through the continent. The Munich Agreement, which allowed Hitler to annex the Sudetenland, was widely seen as a failed attempt at appeasement. By September 1939, Germany's invasion of Poland triggered the beginning of World War II. France, where Gabrielle was living at the time, declared war on Germany in response to the invasion of Poland. However, the so-called phony war period that followed saw little action on the Western Front. It wasn't until May 1940 that Germany launched its blitzkrieg attack on France, swiftly overpowering French and British forces. The fall of France in June 1940 marked a dark turning point in the war, as the country was divided into an occupied zone in the north and a collaborationist Vichy regime in the south. Gabrielle, like millions of others, watched in horror as Paris, the city of light, fell under German occupation. The occupation brought with it severe restrictions, curfews, propaganda, and the brutal persecution of Jews, resistance fighters, and anyone deemed an enemy of the Third Reich. The vibrant cosmopolitan life of Paris was suffocated under the weight of fear and oppression. The German occupation of France was a time of great peril, but it also sparked acts of extraordinary courage. Many French citizens and expatriates living in France refused to accept the occupation and chose to fight back, despite the tremendous risks involved. Gabrielle Weidner was among those who could not stand idly by while her adopted country suffered under the Third Reich. The Dutch Paris Escape Line was one of the many resistance networks that sprang up during the occupation. Founded by Gabrielle's brother, John Weidner, the network became a lifeline for many who were desperate to escape German-occupied Europe. The Dutch Paris line was particularly focused on helping Dutch Jews, Allied airmen who had been shot down over Europe, and other individuals targeted by the German forces. John Weidner, like Gabrielle, was deeply influenced by their family's values. He was a devout Seventh-day Adventist, and his religious convictions drove him to oppose the German forces' atrocities. With his knowledge of the European landscape and multiple languages, John was well positioned to establish a resistance network that could operate across borders. The Dutch Paris line extended from the Netherlands, through Belgium and France, to neutral Switzerland and Spain. Gabrielle joined the Dutch Paris network early in its formation, becoming one of its most trusted and active members. Her role in the resistance was multifaceted and highly dangerous. Operating out of Paris, she was responsible for managing communications, distributing forged documents, coordinating escape routes, and arranging safe houses for those on the run. Gabrielle's work required meticulous planning and constant vigilance. She was well aware that the Gestapo, the German secret police, were always on the lookout for resistance activities. Any misstep could lead to arrest and torture, not just for her, but for everyone involved in the network. Despite the risks, Gabrielle carried out her duties with unwavering commitment. The Dutch Paris network faced numerous challenges, from the constant threat of infiltration by National Socialist collaborators to the logistical difficulties of moving people across heavily guarded borders. Yet, under the leadership of John and with the dedication of members like Gabrielle, the network successfully helped thousands of people escape the clutches of the German forces. Gabrielle's fluency in multiple languages and her understanding of European geography made her an invaluable asset to the network. The chill of an autumn evening in 1943 shrouded Paris, a city now gripped by fear under German occupation. The once vibrant streets had grown silent, the air thick with dread as the Gestapo intensified their hunt for Jews. Gabrielle Weidner, deeply entrenched in the Dutch Paris resistance network, received urgent word that a prominent Jewish family, the Rothsteins, was about to be discovered. The family had evaded capture for months, constantly on the move, but their luck had run out. The Gestapo had tracked them to their latest hideout, and time was running out. Gabrielle knew she had to act fast. She immediately set to work on forging new identity papers for the Rothsteins, transforming them into Belgian nationals with fabricated medical histories. The plan she concocted was audacious. She would disguise the escape as a medical emergency, using the cover of a deadly contagious disease to deter National Socialists' interference. It was a perilous gamble, but there was no other choice. As darkness fell, Gabrielle prepared for the mission. She dressed in a nurse's uniform, complete with the Red Cross emblem, and made her way to the Rothsteins' hideout in a dilapidated van marked as an ambulance. The streets were eerily quiet, save for the occasional sound of distant sirens or the bootsteps of patrolling soldiers. Gabrielle's heart pounded in her chest, but she maintained her composure. She knew that one mistake, one hint of fear could unravel the entire operation. At the hideout, the Rothstein family waited in terrified silence. Mr. Rothstein, once a successful businessman, now looked gaunt and worn, his eyes hollow from weeks of anxiety. Mrs. Rothstein clutched their two young children, her face etched with worry. When Gabrielle arrived, their relief was palpable, but fear still gripped them. The children, sensing the tension, remained silent as they were bundled into the van. As they drove through the darkened streets of Paris, every corner felt like a potential ambush. German checkpoints had become more frequent, and Gabrielle knew that the Gestapo were growing increasingly suspicious. She had memorized her cover story, rehearsing it in her mind over and over. The Rothsteins were a Belgian family, suffering from a highly contagious form of tuberculosis, and they were being transported to a quarantine facility in the countryside. Halfway to their destination, they encountered a checkpoint. Gabrielle's pulse quickened as the van slowed to a stop. A German officer approached, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. He barked orders in German, demanding to see their papers. Gabrielle, channeling every ounce of her courage, handed over the forged documents. The officer scrutinized them, his eyes narrowing as he looked from the papers to the family huddled in the back of the van. "What is the nature of this transport?" the officer demanded. "Contagious tuberculosis," Gabrielle replied in flawless German, holding up the forged medical report. They must be moved to a quarantine facility immediately. Orders from the health ministry. The officer hesitated, eyeing the family suspiciously. The children, coached by Gabrielle, began to cough weakly, adding authenticity to the ruse. The officer recoiled slightly, clearly unsettled by the possibility of infection. After a tense moment, he waved them through, not wanting to risk further contact. Gabrielle exhaled silently as they drove away, but the danger was far from over. They still had miles to go, and any number of obstacles could appear. But hour by hour, they moved closer to safety, passing through a series of safe houses along the way. Gabrielle's nerves were stretched thin, but she remained vigilant, knowing that any lapse could be fatal. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the border with neutral Switzerland. Gabrielle's contact at the border, another member of the resistance, guided them through a final checkpoint. As the Rothsteins crossed into Switzerland, the weight of their survival began to sink in. They were safe, out of the reach of the German forces, all thanks to Gabrielle's fearless ingenuity. The Rothsteins never forgot Gabrielle Weidner's bravery. They lived to see the end of the war, forever grateful to the woman who had risked everything to save them. The story of their rescue spread through the resistance, and Gabrielle's reputation as a daring and resourceful operative grew. It was a victory not just for the Rothsteins, but for the entire resistance movement, a testament to the power of courage and the will to resist. The year was 1944, and the Allies were gearing up for the most significant military operation of the war, D-Day. In the months leading up to the invasion, the resistance in occupied France was tasked with disrupting German supply lines, weakening the enemy's hold on the region. Gabrielle Weidner, now a seasoned member of the Dutch Paris network, received intelligence about a critical German supply train scheduled to transport ammunition, weapons, and reinforcements to the Normandy coast. The train was heavily guarded, and the mission to sabotage it was deemed nearly impossible, but Gabrielle was undeterred. The train was set to depart from Paris under the cover of night, traveling through rural areas before reaching the front lines. Gabrielle, using her connections, gathered detailed information about the train's route and schedule. She discovered a weak point along the tracks near a secluded forested area, an ideal spot for an ambush. The plan was to derail the train, crippling the German supply chain and buying the Allies precious time. Gabrielle assembled a small team of resistance fighters, each carefully chosen for their skills and loyalty. They spent days preparing for the operation, gathering explosives, tools, and intelligence. Gabrielle, who had become adept at handling explosives, meticulously planned every detail of the sabotage. The timing had to be perfect. Any miscalculation could mean disaster. On the night of the operation, the team set out under the cloak of darkness. The forest was silent, the air thick with anticipation. Gabrielle led the way, her senses heightened, every rustle in the leaves making her heart skip a beat. They reached the tracks hours before the train was scheduled to pass, giving them just enough time to set up the explosives. Gabrielle and her team worked swiftly, placing the charges at strategic points along the tracks. The tension was palpable. Every moment felt like it stretched into an eternity. Gabrielle double-checked each connection, her hands steady despite the weight of what was at stake. As they finished, the distant sound of the train's whistle echoed through the night. They had mere minutes left. Taking cover in the dense underbrush, the team waited in silence as the train approached. The ground began to vibrate, the sound of the engine growing louder. Gabrielle's heart pounded in her chest as she held the detonator in her hand, her eyes fixed on the train. She knew she had only one chance to get it right. As the train reached the designated point, Gabrielle took a deep breath and pressed the detonator. The explosion was deafening, a massive fireball erupting as the charges went off. The ground shook violently, and the train's cars were thrown from the tracks, tumbling into the forest with a cacophony of metal and fire. The night sky was lit up by the flames, and the screams of the German soldiers trapped in the wreckage echoed through the trees. Gabrielle and her team didn't linger. They knew the German forces would soon be swarming the area. Moving swiftly through the forest, they disappeared into the night, leaving behind the chaos they had wrought. The mission had been a success, one of the most significant acts of sabotage in the region. The destruction of the train delayed the German reinforcements for days, giving the Allies a crucial advantage as they prepared for the Normandy invasion. Word of the operation spread quickly through the resistance. Gabrielle's bold leadership and flawless execution of the mission earned her widespread admiration. The sabotage of the German supply train became one of the most celebrated actions of the resistance, a symbol of defiance against the German war machine. Gabrielle Weidner's name was whispered with reverence, her bravery and tactical brilliance inspiring others to join the fight. By the winter of 1943, the skies over Europe were filled with the roar of Allied bombers, relentless in their assault on German positions. But with every mission, there was a risk. Planes were shot down, and airmen were forced to parachute into hostile territory, where capture by the German forces often meant a grim fate. When a group of Allied airmen was downed over northern France, the Dutch Paris network was called into action to orchestrate their escape. Gabrielle Weidner, now a veteran of the resistance, was entrusted with the perilous mission. The airmen scattered across the countryside were in hiding, relying on local farmers and sympathizers for shelter. However, with the Gestapo tightening its grip on the region, their situation was becoming increasingly dire. Gabrielle knew that the airmen had to be moved quickly before the German forces closed in. She devised a complex escape plan that would take the men across France, through the Pyrenees Mountains, and into neutral Spain. The operation required flawless coordination. Gabrielle began by arranging a network of safe houses, each run by trusted members of the resistance. She also secured forged documents, civilian clothes, and essential supplies for the airmen. The plan was to move them in small groups to avoid detection, a strategy that required precision timing and absolute secrecy. The first challenge was to gather the airmen without attracting attention. Gabrielle, disguised as a nun, traveled to each hiding place, her presence calming the anxious men. She briefed them on the plan, emphasizing the importance of discipline and silence. The airmen, though seasoned soldiers, were visibly shaken by the prospect of crossing German-occupied territory on foot, but Gabrielle's resolve and confidence gave them the strength they needed. As they began their journey, the airmen were disguised as farmhands and laborers, blending in with the rural population. Gabrielle led them through a series of safe houses, each more dangerous than the last. They traveled by night, sleeping in barns and cellars, always one step ahead of the German forces. The harsh winter weather added to their hardships, but Gabrielle kept the group's morale high, her determination unwavering. The final leg of the journey was the most treacherous. The Pyrenees, a formidable natural barrier between France and Spain, were covered in snow and ice. The airmen, weakened by the cold and the weeks of constant danger, were near their breaking point. Gabrielle, too, was exhausted, but she knew that turning back was not an option. They had to cross the mountains, no matter the cost. Guided by local smugglers who knew the treacherous terrain, the group began the arduous ascent. The path was narrow and steep, the wind howling through the peaks. Several times they had to stop to avoid German patrols, hiding in caves or behind rocks, their breath freezing in the air. The airmen struggled to keep up, but Gabrielle urged them on, her voice a lifeline in the desolate landscape. After days of grueling travel, they finally reached the Spanish border. The sight of the neutral territory brought tears to the airmen's eyes. They had made it. Gabrielle, despite her exhaustion, felt a surge of triumph. The mission was a success, the airmen were safe, and another blow had been struck against the National Socialist regime. Once in Spain, the airmen were handed over to British agents, who arranged for their return to England. They would later rejoin the fight, their harrowing escape becoming a symbol of resistance and hope. For Gabrielle Weidner, it was another victory, another act of defiance in a war that demanded every ounce of courage. The escape of the Allied airmen became one of the most celebrated stories of the Dutch Paris network, a testament to the bravery and ingenuity of those who risked everything to save lives and resist tyranny. The work of the resistance was not only physically exhausting, but also emotionally taxing. Gabrielle, like many in the movement, had to live a double life. By day, she was a secretary working in Paris. By night, she was a covert operative in one of the most dangerous resistance networks in occupied Europe. The constant fear of discovery, coupled with the knowledge that many of her friends and colleagues had already been arrested or killed, weighed heavily on her. Gabrielle's role often involved transporting sensitive documents, money, and forged papers. She also played a crucial part in organizing safe passage for refugees, many of whom were Jewish families fleeing the war. The routes she helped coordinate were fraught with danger, involving treacherous journeys through forests, mountains, and across borders patrolled by German soldiers. Despite the overwhelming odds, Gabrielle's work was highly effective. The Dutch Paris network saved an estimated 1,080 people during the war, including 800 Jews and 112 Allied airmen. Each successful escape was a victory against the German forces, a small but significant blow to their regime of terror. But as the war dragged on, the German forces intensified their efforts to crush the resistance. The Gestapo, known for their ruthless efficiency, infiltrated many resistance groups, leading to widespread arrests. The Dutch Paris network was not immune to these pressures. In early 1944, a betrayal within the network led to the capture of several key members, including Gabrielle. On February 26, 1944, Gabrielle Weidner was arrested by the Gestapo in Paris. The arrest was a devastating blow to the Dutch Paris network, as Gabrielle was one of its most central figures. She was taken to Frasne prison, a notorious facility used by the German forces to detain and torture members of the resistance. At Frasne, Gabrielle was subjected to brutal interrogations by the Gestapo. The goal was to extract information about the Dutch Paris network, its members, and its operations. Gabrielle, however, remained resolute. Despite the physical and psychological torture, she refused to betray her comrades. Her silence was a testament to her incredible courage and strength of character. Gabrielle's imprisonment was marked by isolation and deprivation. The conditions at Frasne were harsh, with prisoners kept in small, overcrowded cells and given minimal food. The constant threat of execution loomed over all who were held there. Yet even in the darkest moments, Gabrielle found solace in her faith. Her prayers and the teachings of her childhood sustained her during the long, painful months of imprisonment. Gabrielle was sent to Germany's Ravensbrück concentration camp, following many months in Frasne prison. Among the biggest female camps within the German concentration camp network was Ravensbrück. Tens of thousands of women were forced to labor, experimented upon medically, and executed at this location of unfathomable suffering. The path to Ravensbrück was terrible. Gabrielle and her fellow inmates spent days of travel in filthy conditions, packed onto crowded trains with no food or drink. Their arrival to Ravensbrück met with violence. Many of the women among the camp guards were infamous for their violence. New immigrants were shaved, stripped of their possessions, and handed the famed striped uniforms. Everyday survival at Ravensbrück was a fight. The conditions in the packed camp were horrible. Often in frigid temperatures, prisoners were compelled to labor long hours in manufacturing or construction. Food was few, and malnutrition was common. In the unhygienic circumstances, disease spread rapidly, and medical treatment was practically non-existent. For those close to her, Gabrielle was a comfort even with the atrocities all around her. Her strength to keep on came from her faith, which had always been a compass in her life. She prayed, gave her words of support, and showed her solidarity to her. But the terrible conditions of Ravensbrück severely deteriorated Gabrielle's health. Months of forced labor and captivity had weakened her, and early 1945, she became quite sick. Few months before the war ended, on February 17, 1945, Gabrielle Weidner passed away at Ravensbrück, a martyr for justice and freedom. She was no ordinary woman. She was a force of nature, a quiet warrior who waged her battle not with weapons, but with a heart full of courage and an unyielding sense of duty. In a world gone mad, she found the strength to stand tall, risking everything she had to save those who could not save themselves. The horrors of war tested her, broke her, but never could they extinguish the fierce light within her. Even in the darkest hours, when the weight of her sacrifices pressed down like a heavy shroud, Gabrielle did not falter. She continued to fight, not because it was easy, but because it was right. As she faced her final days, the cruelty of her captors and the coldness of her prison walls could not steal the dignity she carried with her always. Her body may have been frail, but her spirit was unbreakable, a testament to the unshakable belief in the goodness she so desperately sought to protect. Gabrielle Weidner's story is not just one of heroism. It is a story of love for humanity, for justice, and for the innocent lives she saved at such great cost. She did not live to see the end of the war, but in many ways, she was its victor. For in her quiet defiance, she triumphed over the hatred that sought to destroy her. Her name might not be etched in history books alongside the great military leaders of her time, but those who know her story will never forget the courage of this remarkable woman. Gabrielle Weidner gave everything she had, and in doing so, she changed the world for the better. In the end, Gabrielle's legacy is in the lives she saved, and also she set an example for all of us. To stand up in the face of evil, to choose love over fear, and to remain steadfast in the belief that even in the darkest times, a single person can make an extraordinary difference.